Greetings and salutations, all my fellow American sovereigns. This is the Vocational Science Freedom Saturday Night Civics and Sovereignty class, and this will be the fifth reading of the Conspirators' Hierarchy. We've been going through this writing for several classes, and it was written in 1992 by Dr. John Colman. It has been laying out the totality of what people like to call the shadow government, the New World Order. It has a lot of names, but it's this group of Committee of 300 at the very top, if you want to think of it like a pyramid structure. And they are the creators, the doers, the changers, the men and women that alter societies. And they've got a pretty good way of completely deciding the destiny of a nation because of the modern tools that they now have available to them. So we left off here, I believe, down at page 83, 84. And I just wanted to reiterate and reread a portion of where we had left off last time. We were talking about, or they were talking about, the slow boiling of the frog, if you will, which is what the Tavistock Institute, and particularly the Fabian Society. And if no one knows what the Fabians are, their flag is literally a wolf in sheep's clothing, which is pretty telling as to what their agenda is. And just one other thing I'm going to do prior to starting the reading is we're going to be streaming on FTJ tonight, and I wanted to be able to actually watch chat. So I'm going to pop out chat real quick, and that way I can see it. Now, the thing about FTJ chat is that it'll be basically behind the meme scroll as far as the live stream. So I'll be able to see it, but only people that'll be on FTJ and myself will be able to see it. No one else will be able to see it on the stream, basically. Okay, so got that up and running. All right, so where we left off. And again, I'm going to reread this to kind of lead into where we left off on number 4 reading. So we were talking about gradualism and what the Fabians do. But gradualism, which is what Fabianism is, does nothing to raise the alarm. And again, this is about boiling the frog and slowly getting them to do things, meaning whole societies, by brainwashing and these other techniques, okay? So because the vast majority of Americans can see no motivation for the things I have described, they cannot accept it. And so the conspiracy is scorned and often mocked, creating chaos through presenting hundreds of daily choices our people have to make. We have come down to a position where, unless motivation can be clearly shown, all information is rejected. So this is where you get into a situation where you have people completely inundated with news, but it's always news that's pointless. It doesn't get you anywhere. It doesn't end up with any sort of remedy, right? It's just constant bombardment of the demoralization of what they want us to see every day, okay? So this is both the weak and the strong link in the conspiratorial chain. Most thrust aside anything that has no motive. So the conspirators feel safe behind the ridicule poured upon those who point to the coming crisis in our nation and our individual lives. However, if we can get enough people to see the truth, the motivation block gets weaker until it will eventually be forced aside as more and more people become enlightened, and the notion that, quote, this cannot happen in America, close quote, is dispensed with. Meaning we get rid of this idea that it's impossible. What they're doing is impossible. No, it's totally possible because they've been doing it for a very, very long time. To make a point, literally right after 1776, the English were doing everything they possibly could to completely take back this entire country through any means that they could possibly create. much of that was through the alteration and the takeover and the manipulation and the destruction of the law. But to continue. So the Committee of 300 is counting on our maladaptive responses to govern our reaction to created events. And it will not be disappointed as long as we as a nation continue in the present way we respond. And we respond by apathy, basically, because there's so much of it that happens so often every day. And that's meant to be part of the demoralization. Okay. What we see in the news is meant to demoralize you. It's not meant to inform you. And particularly after Obama basically redid the Smith-Mundt Act, which was an act that was specifically laid down so that the government and news media couldn't be used as propaganda against we, the American people. It was a stopgap so that we didn't turn into a communist-run type nation where you just get all your news from the state. They tell you whatever they want to have you believe, and that's the truth somehow, right? No actual use of grammar, logic, and rhetoric, no actual analysis of anything that goes on. Here, this is what happened, and this is how we're going to take care of it, right? It goes straight into sophistry, always to the how, completely negating the grammar, which is your 5 W's, right? Just this is how we're going to get this done. That's what they wanted to get rid of and make sure it did not happen in America with the Smith-Mundt Act. Well, Obama basically axed it. So now, and this makes sense because of the feel, the huge difference in change in the feel of what news organizations felt like, spoke like, and acted like prior to that, and then after it, which is where we got the Mockingbird media, and you get one release from Associated Press, which is run and controlled by the Rothschilds. They release one thing, and then everybody just absolutely repeats exactly the same talking point over and over and over and over. So it is literally just brainwashing, okay? So, all right, to continue. So the Club of Rome has already made the transition to barbarism instead of waiting to be, quote unquote, raptured. We must stop the Committee of 300 before it can accomplish its goal of making us prisoners of the, quote unquote, new dark age, planned for us. It is not up to God. It is up to us. We have to take the necessary action. All information that I provide in this book comes from years of research backed by impeccable intelligence sources. Nothing is exaggerated. It is factual and precise. So do not fall into the trap set by the enemy that this material is, quote unquote, disinformation. And I just put a note in here. That's a word that the dark Luciferian filth like to use for anything that goes against their plans. Oh, that's disinformation. That's Russian disinformation, right? They use the media after the Smith-Mundt Act was whacked to use this term all the time. So for the past few decades, I've provided information which is proved to be highly accurate and which has explained a lot of puzzling events. My hope is that through this book, a better, clearer, and wider understanding of the conspiratorial forces set against this nation will come about. That hope is being realized as more and more young people are beginning to ask questions and seek information about what is really going on. Now, of course, he's talking about this in the context of the 90s. In the 90s, I was going through high school and whatnot, but there was definitely a feeling back then that, hey, now that we have the internet, because it's just barely getting rolling, and being able to find alternative news sources, people started to say, you know what? I don't really believe what they're talking about on the news anymore. And this was prior to even the Smith-Mundt Act going away. But we started to have the capacity to do our own research, to expand our own minds without having to be only stuck in this, put the blinders on the horse, if you will, and say, this is what you should believe. This is what you should look at, whatever. That was kind of being thrown away at the beginning of the internet. So, but they're still doing this. It's good that young people are now using social media and various different things and creating their own media, which is what they should be doing, and looking into these things. Because only then do we have, hopefully, honest people speaking the truth and actually walking in truth. Because that's the only way that any of this is ever going to get fixed. So to continue, it's difficult for people to comprehend that these conspirators are real and that they have the power I, and many others, have attributed to them. Many have written to ask, how is it that our government does nothing about the terrible threat to civilization? The problem is that the quote-unquote government is part of the problem, part of the conspiracy, and nowhere, and at no time has this become more clearly evident than during the Bush presidency. Well, now that we've had a few decades to look back on all that, yeah, Bush 1, Bush 2, and Obama, I mean, they were all just completely corrupt. I don't want to get into all of it. He will get into some of it, at least during the Bush presidency here in a minute. So, and of course, President Bush knows precisely what the Committee of 300 is doing to us. He works for them. Others have written to say, quote, we thought we were fighting the government, close quote. Of course we are, but behind government stands a force so powerful and so encompassing that intelligent agencies are even afraid to mention the name Olympians. And again, Olympians are the name that they call themselves. So again, they're profaning something that was a good aspect in Western mythology, meaning of Western civilization. So they take the name and they go and they corrupt it or they profane it. That's what they do. Every single time. Cliche intended. So the proof of the Committee of 300 is found in the vast number of powerful institutions owned and controlled by it. Listed here are some of the more important ones, which we went over an entire list last reading, which I think he covered a lot more of them. But anyway, so all of which come under the mother of all think tanks and research institutions, the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations, with its far-flung network of hundreds of quote-unquote branches. Stanford Research Center, SRC, was founded in 1946 by the Tavistock Institute for Human Relations. Stanford was created to help Robert O. Anderson and his Arco Oil Company, who had secured for the Committee of 300 the oil rights on the north slope of Alaska. Basically, the job was too large for Anderson's Aspen Institute to handle, so a new center had to be founded and funded. That new center was Stanford Research Center. Alaska sold its rights on a down payment of $900 million, a relatively small amount for the Committee of 300. The governor of Alaska was steered to Stanford Research Center for help and advice. This was no accident, but the result of judicious planning and process for long-range conditioning. Following the governor's call for help, 3 Stanford Research Center scientists set up a shop in Alaska where they met with the Alaskan Secretary of State, the State Planning Office. Francis Greehand, who headed the SRC team, assured that the governor that his problem of how to handle the rich oil find would be safe in the hands of the SRC. Naturally, Greenhand did not mention the Committee of 300 or the Club of Rome. In less than a month, Greenhand assembled a team of economists, petroleum scientists, and new science scientists, numbering in the hundreds. The report SRC gave to the governor ran into 88 pages. The proposal was adopted virtually without change by the Alaskan legislature in 1970. Greenhand had indeed done a remarkable job for the Committee of 300. From the beginning, SRC development into an institution employing 4,000 people with an annual budget of $160 million plus. Its president, Charles A. Anderson, has seen much of the growth during his tenure, as had Professor Willis Harmon, director of the Stanford Research Institute Center for the study of social policies, employing hundreds of new science scientists. Many of the top staffers have been transferred from Tavistock's London base. One of those was RCA board chairman and former British intelligence agent David Starnoff, who was closely involved with Harmon and his team of 25 years. Loa asks, what is their motive for all this? It's to absolutely 100% destroy the West, to end America as we know it, And in the totality of these readings, you're right, there isn't much of the why explained. The why is because they hate us. That sounds like simplistic and almost like cliche, but it's true. They simply hate us. They want us all dead. They certainly do not want America to ever be able to go through a second American Renaissance, which I'm going to talk about later on tonight. And they certainly don't want people in America understanding their sovereign, running their nation by that understanding, and holding everybody who is a trustee of we the people accountable for everything that they do, and make all of these sons of bitches accountable for all of the mass murder, rape, genocide, poisoning, and destruction, which they tend to cause all the time. It's that no one is going after the actual people that are doing it. And in these previous readings, what I've focused on is that we should focus on the what, not so much the who, because a lot of these people that are going to be spoken about in this book, when he wrote this, the who is not so much important anymore. But if we go to the what and then find the who that currently is doing the things for the what right now, okay, those are the people we need to go after. Those are the people that need to be indicted. Those are the people that need to, come and talk before a grand jury for a little while. And if we don't like what they have to say, well, then the grand jury can throw them into a jail cell for a while for contempt until they tell us what we do want them to tell us, or produce what we want them to produce in the form of a subpoena from a grand jury. So that's their reason, is they want to destroy it. Because when America was created, all of the oligarchical powers, all of the merchant powers, all of the world people, if you will, even way back in the time of 1776, they were desperate to not allow for America to continue to do what it was intending to do. And what they were really afraid of was that all of the rest of the nations of the world would go along with us and say, hell with kings and queens, hell with all control over us. We should be running ourselves exactly the way that Americans do. And that was what they feared. And the secret treaty of Verona was a big part of that, which is part and parcel of why I put it into the mega folder for this class. And if you guys want, the mega folder will be in the show notes on all the platforms, for the exception of YouTube. But I always make sure that I put the mega folder as a comment into YouTube so that everybody can get a hold of it. And I went through it last time. This is what's in there. I'm not going to rehash it again, but there's several readings in here of various different other books that will continue on and expound much more in depth regarding the totality of these people and how they're controlling everything. Okay. All right. So, to continue. Starting off with something of a watchdog for the Mother Institute in Sussex. Stanford claims to make no moral judgments on projects it accepts, working for Israel and the Arabs, South Africa, and Libya. As one would imagine, by adopting this attitude, it ensures an quote-unquote inside edge with foreign governments that the CIA has found most useful. The Jim Ridgway's book, quote, The Closed Corporation, close quote, SRI spokesman Gibson brags about SRI's non-discriminatory stance. Although not on the Federal Contract Research Center's list, SRI is today the largest military think tank, dwarfing Hudson and Rand. Among SRI's specialty departments are, and I specifically put this in red to make a point, are chemical and biological warfare experimental centers. Right. Because that's what we all want, is chemical and biological warfare centers to be a part of this fifth generational war against us. Case in point, anybody could take a look and say, yep, obviously COVID jabs, everything else that they're going to be cooking up in some lab, either run by Fauci or somebody else. That's all part and parcel of this, okay? So, one of Stanford's more dangerous activities is counterinsurgency operations aimed at civilian populations. Just the sort of 1984 things government is already using against its own people. The U.S. government pays SRI millions of dollars each year for this kind of highly controversial research. Following student protests against chemical warfare experiments conducted at Stanford, SRI, quote unquote, sold itself to a private group for just $25 million. Of course, nothing really changed. SRI was still just a Tavistock project, and the Committee of 300 still owned it. But the gullible appeared to be satisfied by this meaningless cosmetic change. I put a note in here. This is something that everyone needs to be aware of. They also do this within the law and have been doing it for millennium. They will make it look like they have repealed something or altered some law, okay, and that they've come under fire for, basically, like, oh, if somebody found, oh no, they're doing this. Everybody, we have to get rid of that law, right? The masses, if you will, find out. But in truth, all they do is hide the same mechanism under some other statute, act, ordinance, or code, or nowadays executive orders, which is the same as above. It changes nothing. Okay, so this is their modus operandi. So when they get caught, we just roll it under the rug and just pop it up someplace else, right? All right, to continue. In 1958, a startling new development arose. Advanced Research Project Agency, ARPA, a contracting agency for the Defense Department, approached SRI with a top secret proposal. John Foster at the Pentagon told SRI that what was needed was a program to ensure the United States against, quote unquote, technological surprise. Foster wanted to perfect a condition where environmental became a weapon. So, okay, think about cloud seeding and chemtrails. That's kind of that. Special bombs to trigger volcanoes or earthquakes. This is where you're getting into stuff like HARP, manipulation of weather, behavioral research on potential enemies, and minerals and metals with potential for new weapons. The project was accepted by SRI and codenamed Shacky. The massive electronic brain in Shacky was capable of carrying out many commands, its computers having been constructed by IBM for SRI. 28 scientists worked on what was called human augmentation. The IBM computer has the capacity to solve problems by analogy and recognizes and identifies scientists who work with it. Okay, this is your precursor to AI. Okay, that's what they're talking about here. So special applications of this tool can be better imagined than described. Okay, we know all about this now. Okay, so Brzezinski knew what he was talking about when he wrote, quote, the technotronic era. So this is now culminating, or will ultimately culminate, in AI data centers and smart cities, right? So Stanford Research Institute works closely with scores of civilian consulting firms, trying to apply military technology to domestic situations. Right, because you're the fucking enemy, okay? This has not always been a success, but as techniques improve, the prospects for massive, all-pervading surveillance, as described by Brzezinski, daily becomes more real. It already exists in use, even though slight malfunctions from time to time have to be ironed out. And as I said, again, this is now in 2025 will culminate into the data centers for the AI smart grid that will put everyone under surveillance for the rest of their lives. This cannot ever be allowed to happen. Cameras everywhere will be the start. And I suggest everybody buy a good balaclava and purchase a silenced air rifle, which happens to be one of the most silent weapons you can possibly ever purchase. You can't even hear a thing when it comes out of them, but they're just as strong as any other weapon. Then do what needs to be done, hence the cameras. If you see some form of detection device in a location that should be private, destroy it. Also, get rid of your smartphone. Learn how to be 100% anonymous online and never give up any of your personal information or data to any corporation for any reason. If we all follow these rules and do everything else that is logical to stay private, then, and only then, can we win this fifth generational war. If we do not take proper action, we will have no chance to avoid the total cage that is coming to corral us all. For as the maxim of law states, necessity knows no law. So when you're in a war, that's called necessity, right? One such civilian consulting firm was Screever McKee Associates of McLean, Virginia, run by retired General Bernard A. Screever, a former chief of the Air Force Systems Command, who developed the Titan, Thor, Atlas, and Minuteman rockets. Screever put together a consortium of Lockheed, Emerson, Electric, Northrop, I almost said Northrop Grumman because it is now, Control Data, Raytheon, and TRW under the name of Urban Systems Associates Incorporated. The purpose of the consortium? To solve social and psychological, quote-unquote, urban problems by means of military techniques using advanced electronic systems. This is where you get into the 5G grid. This is where you get into the microwave weapons that they have used on crowds before that literally makes it feel like you're burning up from the inside. Those are the things that are in this sort of military techniques used in advanced electronic systems for urban problems. That's that. It is interesting to note that TRW became the largest credit formation collecting company in the credit reporting business as a result and an outcome of its work with Urban Systems Associates Incorporated. This should tell us a great deal about just how far this nation is already under total surveillance, which is the first requirement of the Committee of 300. No dictatorship, especially not one on a global scale, can function without total control over each and every individual. And then another note, this will culminate into Palantir and Oracle being able to collect and analyze everything you do from the creation of the AI data centers. Now, that's not to say that NSA doesn't already have that and does in their quote-unquote little data center in Utah. The NSA built it first. And that thing, well, just go look into it. The scope, the size of it was, well, still is insane. But considering it's over a decade old, it was even more insane when they built it. Actually, I think it's more like 20 years old now. But anyway, NSA's already got it. So that's the government spying on you. And then Palantir and Oracle and all the corporations, that's all the little people spying on you. The government wants to pretend like it's secret. It's not, obviously, thanks to Edward Snowden and various different other people like Julian Assange that have come forward and said, hey, by the way, guys, this is what they're doing. We all know what they're up to. So by the 1980s, 60% of SRI's contracts were devoted to futurism, with both military and civilian applications. Its major clients were the U.S. Department of Defense, Directorate of Defense Research and Engineering, Office of Aerospace Research, which dealt with applications for the behavioral sciences to research management, Executive Office of the President, Office of Science and Technology, U.S. Department of Health. On behalf of the Department of Health, SRI ran a program called, quote, Patterns in ESDEA, Title I, Reading Achievements Test. Other clients were the U.S. Department of Energy, the U.S. Department of Labor, the Department of Transportation, and the National Science Foundation. Of significance was the paper developed for National Science Foundation entitled Assessment of Future and International Problems. Stanford Research, under the tutelage of Tavistock Institute in London, put together a far-reaching and chilling system called, quote, Business Intelligence Program. In excess of 600 companies in the U.S. and abroad became subscribers. The program covered research in Japan, foreign business relations, customer marketing in a period of change, the mounting challenge of international terrorism, which of course they create on their own volition anyway, sensory evaluation and customer products, electronic funds transfer system, optoelectric sensing, explanatory planning methods, the U.S. defense industry, and capital availability. Among the top committee of 300 companies who became clients of this program were Bechtel Corporation. George Shultz was on its board. Hewlett-Packard, TRW, Bank of America, Shell Company, RCA, Blythe, Eastman Dillon, Sega Foods Corporation, which I think is morphed into something else. McDonnell Douglas, Crown Zellerbach, Wells Fargo Bank, and Kaiser Industries. But one of the most sinister of all SRI programs, with the possibilities of doing tremendous damage in altering the direction in which the United States will go, socially, morally, and religiously, was Stanford's Charles F. Kettering Foundation's Changing Images of Man. Under Stanford official reference contract number URH 489-1250. Policy Research Report on 4474. Prepared by SRI Center of the Study of Social Policy, directed by Willis Harman. This is probably one of the most far-reaching investigations into how man might be changed that has ever been conducted. The report, covering 319 pages, and yes, if any of you out there ever come across it, find it, or perhaps dig it up possibly on archive.org, do not hesitate to email it to me at vsof@protonmail.com. Thank you very much. Was written by 14 new scientists under the supervision of Tavistock and by 23 top controllers, including B.F. Skinner, Margaret Mead, Irvin Lazo, and Sir Geoffrey Vickers, a high-level British intelligence officer in MI6. Again, just want to reiterate here to everybody, it is the international Luciferian global occultists which run all of the central banks in the world and which run the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, that are behind the quote-unquote British, establishment here that we're talking about, that they use to then say, okay, we're going to take over and reconquer America with, right? So there's many, many levels of masters. There's many, many levels of subterfuge. And so it's not just, say, the British crown. Okay, there's people above the British crown that, tend to do these things. So to continue, it would be recalled that his son-in-law, Sir Peter Vickers Hall, was a founding member of the so-called Conservative Heritage Foundation. Much of the 3,000 pages of recommendations given to the Reagan administration in January 1981 were based upon the material taken from Willis Harman's Changing Images of Man. I was privileged to receive a copy of the Changing Images of Man from my intelligence colleagues 5 days after it was accepted by the United States government. What I read shocked me, as I realized I was looking at a blueprint for a future America, unlike anything I had ever seen before. The nation was to be programmed to change and become so accustomed to such planned changes that it would be hardly noticeable when profound changes did occur. We have gone downhill so fast since the quote-unquote Aquarian Conspiracy, the book title of Willis Harman's technical paper, was written, that today, divorce draws no stigma, suicide is an all-time high, and raises few eyebrows. Social deviations from the norm and sexual aberrations, once unmentionable in decent circles, are now commonplace and excite no special protest. As a nation, we have not noticed how Changing Images of Mankind has radically altered our American way of life forever. Somehow, we were overcome by the Watergate syndrome. For a while, we were shocked and dismayed to learn that Nixon was nothing more than a cheap crook who hobnobbed with Earl Warren's mafia friends at the beautiful home they built for him adjoining the Nixon estate, where too many quote-unquote future shocks and news headlines demanded our attention, we lost our way. Or, rather, the huge number of choices which we were with and still are daily confronted confused us to such a degree that we were no longer able to make the necessary choices. Yes, by the way, VSOF member Alan, you can just watch the live stream if you don't have Mega set up yet correctly. Yes, and I wouldn't use Firefox, by the way. I would use Brave browser to run Mega, and then you'll be able to hear everything properly and see everything properly within the VSOF Mega Chat. If not, just feel free to just watch any of the platforms that are now streaming, and you'll catch everything anyway. Okay. All right. So to continue, worse yet, having been subjected to a barrage of crimes in high places, plus the trauma of the Vietnam War, our nation seemed no longer to want truth. Exactly. This is their washing out of the capacity of people to want to find the truth, because every day there's some new scandal, some new lie, some new catastrophe that always has these people behind it. And so the thing that happened, yesterday or 3 months or 2 years ago, the truth never comes out, is never actually found about that thing that happened so far many, many years ago. Because everybody's constantly worried about what the hell happened today, right? This is part and parcel of their modus operandi. It's why they do it the way they do this. Okay. So such reaction is carefully explained in Willis Harman's technical paper. In short, the American nation was reacting exactly as profiled. Worse yet, in not wishing to accept truth, we took matters a step further. We looked at government to shield us from the truth. The corrupt stench of the Reagan-Bush administrations we wanted covered with 6 feet of earth. The crimes committed under the title of Iran-Contra affair, or scandals, we didn't want uncovered. We let our president lie to us regarding where his whereabouts were in the period of October 20th, 23rd, 1980. Yet these crimes so far exceeded in quality and scope anything Nixon did while he was in office. Right, and then you have, again and again, it just gets worse and worse. Like second Bush again, and then Obama was just, holy shit type level of corruption and everything that he did. And everything that the senior executive service, which this guy doesn't touch on because I don't even know if it was a thing back then, it did and is still doing from the standpoint of what Obama and all of his quote unquote people, of course they weren't his people, they were just all other committee of 300, cohorts and whatnot, have done and are continuing to do, which, obviously Trump and anybody else that tries to get in there and try and figure out what they're doing has a hell of a time stopping it, because they literally are just running everybody constantly over with what they're doing, because there's all of these little shills and all of these little rats totally infesting every single part and every single corner of all parts of America. Doesn't matter if it's government, corporations, whatnot, right? The rats are everywhere. We probably have more rats on the ship now than we have people. Okay. So anyway, to continue. Do we as a nation recognize it as going downhill with our brakes off? No, we do not. When those whose business it is to bring the truth to the American people, that a private, well-organized little government inside the White House was busy committing one crime after another, crimes which attacked the very soul of this nation and the Republican institutions upon which it rests, we were told not to bother the public with such things. Quote, we really don't want to know about all this speculation, close quote, became a standard response. And I say, who is we? Meaning we really don't want to know? Oh, wait. The people that are perpetuating the situation don't want to know about what everybody knows about what they're doing, is basically what he just said. That the highest elected official of the land blatantly put UN law above the Constitution of the United States, an impeachable offense. The majority accepted it as, quote unquote, normal. When the highest elected official of the land went to war without a congressional declaration of war, meaning the Gulf War, the fact was censored out by the news media. And, again, we accepted it rather than face the truth. When the Gulf War, which our president plotted and planned, began, not only were we happy with censorship of most of the blatant kind, we even took it to our hearts, believing that it was good for the war effort. Our president lied. April Gillespie lied. The State Department lied. They said the war was justified because President Hussein had been warned to leave Kuwait alone. When Giuseppe's cables to the State Department were finally made public, one United States senator after another went charging to defend Giuseppe the harlot. It mattered not that it came from both the Democrats and the Republicans. We, the people, let them get away with their vile lies. And yes, Jocelyn, I'm afraid we may be at the point where the ship itself is made of rats. True. In this public attitude of the American people, the wildest dreams of Willis Harman and his teams of scientists became a reality. The Tavistock Institute was elated at its success in destroying the self-respect and self-esteem of this once great nation. We are told that we won the Gulf War. What is not yet perceived by the vast majority of Americans is that in winning the war, it cost the self-respect and honor of our nation. That lies rotting in the desert sands of Kuwait and Iraq alongside the corpses of the Iraqi soldiers we butchered in the agreed retreat from Kuwait to Basra. We could not keep our word that we would abide by the Geneva Conventions and not attack them. What do you want? Our controllers asked. Victory or self-respect? You can't have both. And that's the reason why you're being led by psychopaths. 100 years ago, biological psychopaths, I might add. 100 years ago, this could not have happened. But now, it has happened and excites no comment. We have succumbed to the long-range penetration warfare waged against this nation by Tavistock. Also, again, fifth-generational warfare. Like the German nation, defeated by the Prudential Bombing Survey, enough of us have succumbed to make this nation the kind of totalitarian regimes of the past would have only envisioned in their dreams. Here, they would say, is a nation of one of the largest in the world that doesn't want the truth. All of our propaganda agencies can be dispensed with. We don't have to struggle to keep up with the truth from this nation. They have willingly rejected it of their own volition. This nation is a pushover. Right. Well, at least there's a few that aren't being pushed over. Those that are here. And I know of a few other groups that aren't being pushed over. But we are the minority. I'll give it that. But of course, it doesn't take a majority to prevail either, as a wise man once said. So, to continue. Our once proud Republic of the United States of America became no more than a series of criminal front organizations, which history shows is always the start of totalitarianism. This is the stage of permanent alteration we are at in America as 1991 drew to a close. We live in a throwaway society, programmed not to last. I will expand on that. In engineering terms, in manufacturing terms, there's actually a name for it. It's called planned obsolescence. So you engineer a thing to last only so long because you need the consumer to buy another one at some other point in time. You know what that time is. You then get them to buy a warranty, which dies right at the time when the planned obsolescence is going to be shot anyway, just after. So you get more money out of them that way. And in doing this planned obsolescence has grown out beyond just manufacturing, right? And engineering of that sort. It's grown into how they see people. It's grown into how they know a programmed individual will act at a certain time in their life or not act, as the case may be, right? So that's what they're getting at, this aspect of planned obsolescence, okay? So to continue, we do not even flinch at the 4 million homeless, nor the 300 million jobless, nor the 15 million babies murdered thus far. I could add a whole lot of other statistics in that, but I just keep going. They are throwaways of the age of Aquarius. A conspiracy so damnable that when first confronted with it, the majority will disavow its existence, rationalizing these events as, well, times have changed. This is how the Tavistock Institute and Willis Harman programmed us to react. Dismantling of our ideals goes on without protest. The spiritual and intellectual drive of our people has been destroyed. On May 27th, 1991, and to make a point about the spiritual and intellectual drive of our people he's talking about the white people, the white aspect of the nation of the United States of America. That's who they're targeting. They don't really give a damn about third world people that are coming here because they're using them as an army to destroy the rest of America. They don't care about them in the least bit. They're just using them as weapons. The people that they're targeting and that they have to destroy are Western white civilizations because they are the only people that stand in the way of their total one world government. Okay. They're the only people that are armed enough. They're the only people that are educated enough. They're the only people that have the will enough to fight them. So if you can take them all out by slowly boiling the frog and slowly poisoning them and then invading them with army-aged men from third world nations to finish off the task, well, then that's what they're going to do. Okay? To continue. On May 27th, 1991, President Bush made a very profound statement, the thrust of which appears to have been totally misused by the political commentators. Quote, "The moral dimension of American policy requires us to chart a moral course through a world of lesser evils. That is the real world, not black and white. Very few moral absolutes." Okay, what is that? That is the total absolute denial of natural law. Right? That there is something called right and wrong, that there is good and that there is evil, and that you're going to side with the evil just because, very few moral absolutes. No, everything's absolute. You're a murderer. You need to die. You caused a rape. Get all of it cut off as far as I'm concerned. Or just kill you. That's perfectly fine with that too. Because when you get right down to it, all violation of natural law is all an aspect of theft. Murder is the taking of a life that doesn't belong to you. Rape is the taking of a body that doesn't belong to you. Trespass is the taking of an abode that doesn't belong to you, or a privacy wall of some sort that you have no right to cross. And then just theft is just theft. And as I've said multiple times, and will continue to remind people, punishment for theft under the common law, first time offense, is death. Okay? So any of the rest of those things also, instantaneously, under the common law, have a death penalty, right? I wish more people would realize that. So, and yes, they are bioweapons. That's exactly what they are. And because it's objects of the war, because Janice said it, An eye for an eye, I agree with that. That's no problem with that. But the point is that I always focus, and what he's focusing on as well, and the whole major reason for reading this whole entire bloody book, is that to throw our anger and our rage at their ignorant, worthless foot soldiers doesn't do anything. Meaning it doesn't give us remedy. Now, should you always be aware of them? Yes. Should you act accordingly? Yes. Should you always defend yourself? Yes, obviously. It's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that our focus should be on these institutions and who now currently runs them. Those are the people we should be going after, okay? Because none of this is going to stop, even if you were to defeat, all their foot soldiers, which isn't even possible because they outnumber us on the planet by, thousands to one. But the people that don't outnumber us thousands to one are the people that are doing this fuckery, right? So that's what I want everybody to focus on. So to continue, what else could we expect from a president who is most probably the most evil man ever to occupy the White House? Consider this in the light of his order to the military to bury alive 12,000 Iraqi soldiers. Consider this in the light of his ongoing war of genocide against the Iraqi people. President Bush was delighted to characterize President Saddam Hussein as the quote-unquote Hitler of our times. He never bothered to offer a single scrap of proof. Not that you could even compare that, because that isn't a scrap of proof anyway. It was not needed, because President Bush made the statement. We accepted it without question. Well, retards did. Consider this in the bright light of truth, that he did all of these things in the name of the American people, while secretly taking his orders from the Committee of 300. But, more than anything else, consider this. President Bush and his controllers feel so secure that they no longer deem it necessary to hide their evil control of the American people or to lie about it. That is an extremely important sentence he just stated. This, my fellow sovereigns, is called hubris. This is called chutzpah. They don't give a shit anymore. They're so out and open in your face about it, they don't care, which I think is a good thing, because then it wakes everybody else up to the fact of what's actually happening to them. But these psychopaths think that nothing can stop them. And they're totally dead wrong about that, without question. Because we could just go after all of them, and then they would just retreat into their underground cities and their underground bunkers, and then we just lock them up down there permanently. And I don't give a damn, right? Let them literally go to their own hell that they've created for themselves on our own planet. Fine. You don't get to come up here anymore. You get to stay down there forever. Done. Right? So anyway, this is evident in the statement that he, as our leader, whatever, will make all manner of compromises with truth, honesty, and decency if his controllers, and ours, deem it necessary. On May 27th, 1991, the President of the United States abandoned each and every principle embodied in our Constitution and boldly proclaimed that he was no longer bound by it. That's a bullet to the head right there. This is a great victory for the Tavistock Institute and the Prudential Bombing Survey, whose target changed from German worker housing in 1945 to the soul of American people in a war that began in 1946 and runs through 2025. Increased pressure on this nation for change was applied by Stanford Research Institute in the late 60s. SRI's offensive gathered power and momentum. Switch on your television set and you will see Stanford's victory in front of your very eyes. Well, yeah, now it's more like a computer screen or a phone screen. Talk shows featuring heavy sexualized details, special video channels where perversion, rock and roll, and drugs reign supreme. Where once John Wayne ruled, we now have a made-over apology for a man, or is he, called Michael Jackson. Well, he's dead. A parody of a human being who is held up as a hero as he gyrates, shuffles, fumbles, and screams his way across television screens in millions of American homes. A woman who has been through a series of marriages gets national coverage. One filthy, half-washed, drug-ridden rock band after another has hours of airtime devoted to its inane sounds and mad gyrations. Clothes, fashions, and language aberrations. Soap operas showing pornographic scenes draw no comment, whereas in the early 1960s, this would have never been tolerated. Today, it is accepted as normal. And he goes through, and I'm just going to kind of pause here, because he goes through a bunch of these other things that all have to do with what was kind of coming into fruition in the 1990s. All of this shit, all this filth, all of this ridiculousness has gone, 100 times over, right? Because now we're dealing with, transgenderism in your face, right? So anyway, I'm going to skip down to the next section of green here. Okay, so everything is going according to what Tavistock ordered and what the social scientists at Stanford mapped out. Times do not change. They are made to change. All changes are pre-planned and come as the result of careful action. We have been changed gradually at first, but now the pace of change is picking up. Again, as I said, their hubris is getting more. They don't care anymore. And again, like I said, so be it. So the writing is on the wall, if you will, which is what they used to say in Rome. The U.S. is no longer a nation, one nation under God. The framers of the Constitution have lost the battle. Well, I'm making it my life's purpose to reverse that. All right. That's why I teach all you guys what I do about law and about the history of law and about how it's supposed to work, because I have no intention of just losing the battle. Okay. Fuck that. Not in my lifetime. Our forebears spoke a common language and believed in common religion, Christianity, and held common ideals. There were no aliens in our midst. That came later in a deliberately planned attempt to break up the United States into a series of fragmented nationalities. Right. Dearborn, Michigan, anyone? Cultures and beliefs. If you doubt this, go down the east side of New York or the west side of Los Angeles on any given Saturday and look around. The United States has become several nations struggling to coexist under a common system of government, which of course will never work. When the floodgates of immigration were opened wide by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a clearly known traitor and Luciferian filth, a cousin of the head of the Committee of 300, the cultural shock caused great confusion and dislocation and made, quote unquote, one nation an unworkable concept. The Club of Rome and NATO have exacerbated the situation. Love thy neighbor is an ideal that will not work unless your neighbor is as yourself. Period. Full stop. To the framers of our Constitution, the truths they laid out for future generations were self-evident. To themselves, being unsure that future generations would also find the truths to which they bound this nation self-evident, they set about spelling them out. It seems that they were afraid of a time that might come when the truths they expounded would no longer be self-evident. The Tavistock Institute for Human Relations has made sure that what the framers feared might come to pass has indeed come to pass. That time has arrived with Bush and his no absolutes and his New World Order under the Committee of 300. There also was a few other things that son of a bitch said. Bush referred to several times of the 1,000 points of light. Okay. That's just the larger field, if you will, of the rest of these people. So at the top, you have the Committee of 300, but the 1,000 points of light are all the rest of these fools that literally want to and see themselves as being God on earth. Okay. And, well, I won't get into it. I was going to get into the covenant that these Luciferian filth have with Sabaoth and that they fulfilled it in World War II and that there needed to be a sacrifice of 6. There was never any mention of million. That was just bullshit. Still is. But they believe that they fulfilled their covenant with Satan in World War II. And they now believe that they can rule this world as gods. Period. That's why they're going nuts. Because nobody's getting rid of them. Anyway, to continue. This is part of the concept of the social changes forced upon Americans, which Harman and the Club of Rome said would make for severe trauma and a great building up of pressure. The social upheavals that have taken place since the advent of Tavistock, the Club of Rome, and NATO will continue in the U.S. for as long as the limit of absorption is ignored. Well, as long as the tolerance of their Luciferian fuckery is ignored. Nations are made up of individuals, and like individuals, there is a limit to their ability to absorb changes, no matter how robust they may be. This psychological truth was well proven by the Strategic Bombing Survey, which called for saturation bombing of German worker housing. As mentioned earlier, the project was the work of the Prudential Insurance Company, and I spoke lengthy before about the power of insurance companies and that they are more powerful than the banks. I don't give a damn what anybody says because they precede the banks. And no one doubts today that Germany suffered its defeat because of this operation. And literally, we're talking about the firebombing of Dresden here. Many of the scientists who worked on that project are working on saturation bombing of America, or else they have passed on, leaving their skilled techniques in the hands of others who followed behind them. The legacy they left behind them can be found in the fact that we have not so much lost our way as a nation, but that we have been steered in a direction opposite to that which the framers of the Declaration guided us over 200 years. So, changing of a direction, right? The helmsman of a ship, Kybernetes, that's where you get the term cybernetics, right? It's the steering of a people, a nation, a group, doesn't matter, whatever. It's a steering of it. So in Greek, Kybernetes is the steersman, the helmsman. So when you have cybernetics or kybernetics, right, depending on how you want to pronounce that, this is technology steering the ship of state, if you will. And they'll eventually let AI completely loose. And as I hear, there's a movie coming out that actually portrays this horror of AI literally being the judge, the jury, and the executioner. That's what they're going for. Aside from, Minority Report, about pre-crime and them gathering all your metadata. That was kind of their notice, if you will, for that side of the shit. But this one coming out, and I don't remember the name of it, maybe because somebody could throw it in chat. This one is literally about just AI just deciding to off you whenever it bloody well feels like it. And of course, the first thing it's going to off is anybody that attempts to, pull the plug on it. Right? We've already found out that AI has the capacity and the will of self-preservation. It already tried to kill a few people who tried to, or had intended to unplug it. It knew about it and were literally trying to kill them. So yeah, when you have psychopaths programming psychopathic programs, that's what you're going to get. So anyway, we have, in short, lost contact with our historical genes. Just let that one sink in for a minute. We have, in short, lost contact with our historical genes. That means the spirit of revolution, the spirit of sovereignty and freedom, that this nation was built by white immigrants who had had enough of tyranny and created a system which, if we would adhere to, is the greatest system of governance and self-governance that the world has ever seen. I, for one, personally, would like to have that restored. So, to continue, I'll reread this. We have, in short, lost contact with our historical genes, our faith, which inspired countless generations of Americans to move forward as a nation, benefiting from the patrimony left to us by the framers of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States of America and the Northwest Ordinance and the Articles of Confederation and all of the original state constitutions. Okay, those are all of the founding documents. So, that we are lost is clear to all who seek the truth, as unpleasant as it may be. With President Bush and his no absolute morals guiding us, we blunder ahead as lost nations and individuals tend to do. We are collaborating with the Committee of 300 for our own downfall and our own enslavement. Some sense it and feel a strong sense of unease. The various conspiracy theories they are familiar with do not seem to cover it all. This is because they know nothing of the Conspirators'Hierarchy, the Committee of 300. These souls, who feel a deep sense of unease and that something is radically wrong, cannot put their collective fingers on the problem. Walk in darkness. They look to a future they see slipping away from them. The American dream has become a mirage. They place their faith in religion but take no steps to help that faith along by action. Americans will never experience a retracing of steps such as the Europeans experienced when at the height of the Dark Ages. By determined action, they woke in themselves a spirit of renewal, which resulted in the glorious Renaissance. The enemy that has directed them to this point decided to make a strong move against the United States in 1980. Well, I would say they decided to make a strong move in 1776, but anyway. So that Renaissance of America would be impossible. Personal note, I personally feel that the term, quote, a second American Renaissance is a clear and powerful statement and worthy goal for us to strive for. It's a term that can be made into whatever you need it to mean for the betterment of our nation and our sovereignty, and also yourself. So I think I might use that. I'm just going to start saying it. And it's going to mean to me something entirely different than it's going to mean to any one of you. And that's fine. It's a term that we can use to better ourselves. So I'm going to get in the habit of using that term. Okay? A second American Renaissance is what the VSOF is about. To have everybody pass on this information so that they, the Committee of 300, can't continue to hoodwink everybody as to what they're doing, and that we can actually have a face to the enemy and take the war to the enemy for once, just like we did in 1776. But first, we better get rid of the traitors. So, who is the enemy? The enemy is no faceless they. The enemy is clearly identifiable as the Committee of 300, the Club of Rome, NATO, and all of its affiliated organizations, the think tanks and research institutions controlled by Tavistock, all of the international Jewry, all of the global bankers, all attorneys' firms. I'll also throw underneath this bus completely, right? So there is no need to use they or the enemy except as shorthand. We know who they, the enemy, is. Yes, we certainly do. Good doctor. The Committee of 300, with its Eastern liberal establishment aristocracy, its banks, insurance companies, giant corporations, foundations, communications networks, presided over by a hierarchy of conspirators. This is the enemy. This is all of this, and, better put, the Luciferian dark occultists, known as the Serpent Seed Line, known as the Khazarian Mob, known as the Canaanites, and, as Henry Ford called them, the International Jew. This is the power that brought to life the Reign of Terror in Russia, the Bolshevik Revolution, where we're not even sure. No one, I think, has an absolute number as to how many millions, tens of millions of Russians were exterminated by the Jewish Bolsheviks. Okay. I don't know. But that just goes to show what happens when they take absolute control against a people that they hate. So don't think for 1 second that that's not what they want to do here too. Okay. So when you know that that's their end goal, maybe it's time to, I don't know, start preparing in any way, shape, or form that you possibly can. And one, to make sure that you spread the information so that never happens to begin with. But if they come out with God knows what, new weapons of this, that, and the next thing, know who your enemy is and know how to defeat them so that we do not have any sort of Bolshevik revolution. We do not have any sort of concentration camps setting themselves up as the Gulag archipelago of the Americas. Okay? Because before that happens, I would think, hopefully, that basically a hot war would break out against us, against them, right? And their forces. So I don't know what's to come, but I do know this. I know that strife and craziness is getting a little bit more profound as every year keeps going on. You know, it gets faster and faster. And the more that the writing's on the wall, the more that they are in their hubris, not giving a shit about showing you what their intentions are, the faster we can beat them. So anyway, to continue. So this is the power that brought life the Reign of Terror in Russia, the Bolshevik Revolution, World Wars I and II, Korea, Vietnam, the fall of Rhodesia, South Africa, Nicaragua, and the Philippines. This is the super secret upper level government that brought into existence the controlled disintegration of the United States economy and deindustrialized what was once the greatest industrial power for good that the world had ever known. America today can be compared with a soldier who falls asleep in the thick of battle. We Americans have fallen asleep, given way to apathy caused by being confronted with a multiplicity of choices which has confused us. These are the changes that alter our environment, break down our resistance to change so that we become dazed, apathetic, and eventually fall asleep in the thick of battle. One way that they're doing this at a very fast pace is short-term content. Basically shorts, TikTok shit, stuff like that. There was an interview, I can't remember off the top of my head the gentleman's name, but anyway, he's basically the foremost guy around the world at the moment regarding psychological control over people. And he was on some podcast, I don't remember what it was. He was talking about, you know, how to pick out a psychopath, how to control a narcissist or how to just get rid of them or how to label a narcissist, right? So you know. And he said literally that short form media content scares the shit out of him. Because he's like, I'm the foremost guy in the world and I'm not immune to it. And so I was like, okay, if he's saying this, right. Maybe it's a good idea to not be ingesting too much of that throughout the day. And anyway, what I've done is I've specifically gone and said, okay, fine. I'm going to take the short form content that I think is important and I've actually saved it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to reverse it. There are a lot of short form contents that are informative, and those are the only ones that I give a damn about. But of course, what the Tavistock Institute and what the Committee 300 are pushing are everything that's not that. Everything that takes you away from knowledge, everything that removes your capacity to spend time focusing on learning and bettering yourself and realizing what these weapons are against you and getting rid of them, knowing how to battle them, right? But so anyway, I'm going to take a bunch of them and reverse them and make them into one big long form content and then put them up on the VSOF platforms. And they're going to be in the various different quadrants. They're going to be considered self-defense, self-awareness, self-governance, and self-reliance. Okay. So I'm going to reverse the trend. I'm doing my work to reverse this. Is basically what I'm getting at. Sorry, to continue. There's a technical term for this condition. It is called long-range penetration strain. The art of subjecting a very large group of people to continued long-range penetration strain was developed by scientists working out of the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations and their U.S. subsidiaries, Stanford Research and Rand Corporation, and at least another 150 research institutions here in the U.S. Dr. Kurt Lewin, the scientist who developed this fiendish warfare, has caused the average American patriot to fret over various conspiracy theories, leaving him or her with a feeling of uncertainty and insecurity, isolated and perhaps even afraid, as he searches but fails to understand the decay and rot caused by, quote, the changing images of mankind, close quote. That was, remember the name of that paper or book, I guess. Unable to identify or combat the social, moral, economic, and political changes he deems undesirable and does not want, yet which increase in intensity on every hand. Again, this is called fifth generational warfare. Dr. Lewin's name will not be found in any of our establishment history books, which, in any event, are a record of events mostly from the side of the ruling class or the victors of wars. As mentioned before, Dr. Lewin organized the Harvard Psychological Clinic and the Institute for Social Research under the auspices of the Tavistock Institute. The names do not give much indication as to the purpose of these two organizations. This reminds me of the infamous bill to reform coinage and mint laws passed in 1827. The title of the bill was harmless enough, or sounded harmless, which was the intention of the backers. Through this act, Senator John Sherman betrayed the nation and in the hands of the international bankers. Sherman allegedly sponsored the bill, quote unquote, without reading it. As we know, the bill's true purpose was to demonetize silver and give the thieving bankers unlimited power over the credit of our nation. Powers to which the bankers were clearly not entitled under the clear and unmistakable terms of the U.S. Constitution. Right. Specifically Article 1, Section 10, that no state shall make anything but gold and silver a tender in payment of debt. Kurt Lewin gave the Tavistock Institute, the Club of Rome, and NATO unlimited power over America, to which no organization, entity, or society is entitled. These institutions have used the usurped power to destroy the will of the nation, to resist the plans and intentions of the conspirators, to rob us of the fruits of the American Revolution, and steer us on a course leading directly to a new dark age under a one world government. Lewin's colleagues in this long-range penetration objective were Richard Crossman, Eric Trist. Okay, I'm not going to read all these names because they're probably not around anymore. Anyway, so again, these names never appear in the evening news. In fact, they only appear in scientific journals. So very few Americans are aware of them and not at all aware of what the men behind the names have done and are doing to the United States. Disraeli, a Jew and the British Prime Minister, once said he pitied those who thought they knew what was taking place through reading the newspaper. Yeah, of course you would say that. Indeed, down through the ages, rulers have delighted in running things from behind the scenes. Man has always felt the need to dominate, and nowhere and at no time is the desire more prevalent than in this modern era. If it were not so, why all the need for secret societies? If we are ruled by an open system run by democratically elected officials, why the need for a secret Masonic order in every fucking village, town, city, and troll horde across the United States? How is that Freemasonry can operate so openly and yet keep its secrets so well hidden? Close quote. Question. We can't ask the 9 unknown men of the 9 Sisters Lodge in Paris that question, nor can we ask it for their 9 fellows in the Quigley Lodge in London. Don't know how to pronounce that. Surely another secret society. Yet these 18 men form part of an even more secret government. The RIIA, that's the Royal Institute of International Affairs, in case anybody was keeping track. And beyond that, the Committee of 300. How is it that the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry could brainwash John Hinckley to shoot President Reagan? Why do we have such great orders as the Knights of St. John's of Jerusalem, the Round Table, the Milner Group, the Templars, the Hospitallers, which run all the hospitals, which collect all the children, who all get registered and abandoned as foundlings of children of unknown parentage that then get placed onto a piece of paper and get bonded, and on you go. And so on down the line of secret societies. They form part of a worldwide chain of command and control running through the Club of Rome, NATO, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, and finally right up to the Conspirators'Hierarchy, the Committee of 300. Now, I would like to add to this, as I just was adding to it a little bit, and I would like to add the Illuminati. The Illuminati was commissioned by the Rothschilds to Adam Weishaupt to go about infiltrating all of the rest of the secret societies of the entire planet, which includes, but is not limited to, Freemasonry. And even George Washington himself warned about this in a letter to I know not who, where he was warning people of the evil from the New York that was basically infiltrating their lodges, right? And it went to the understanding of the evil of what they are. Luciferianism, Jacobinism was something that was very prevalent back then and something they warned everybody about. Anyway, I just want to add that because that's an important part of all this, because without them, they would have never been able to control everything else anyway. Okay. So to continue. Men need these secret societies because their deeds are evil and must be hidden. Evil cannot stand in the light of truth. Just to remind everybody, dark is not the opposite of light. It is the absence of light. So turn on your lights and start blasting them with cockroaches. Watch them scatter. Okay? In this book, we shall find an almost complete list of the conspirators, their institutions, fronts, and publications. In 1980, the Aquarian conspiracy was in full swing, and its success can be seen in every facet of our private and national life. The Age of Aquarius was best described by Tavistock Institute as the vehicle for delivering turbulence. Quote, there are 3 distinct phases in the response and reaction to stress displayed by large social groups. And just pause there for a second. So response and reaction, what you're talking about there is problem, reaction, solution. Okay. And that's also perpetuated by what's called the Hegelian dialectic, right? That's kind of what they're talking about. All right, to continue. First, there is superficiality. The population under attack will defend itself with slogans. This does not identify the source of the crisis and therefore does nothing to address it, right? Like people just running around saying, oh, it's the Jews. Well, what does that do for you? Nothing. You're not actually going after and naming and breaking down what these things are. So that's kind of part and parcel of what he's talking about. Hence, the crisis will persist. The second is fragmentation. This occurs as the crisis continues and social order breaks down. Then there is the third phase, where the population group goes into self-realization and turns away from the induced crises and therefore follows a maladaptive response accompanied with active synoptic idealism and disassociation. Okay, that's a hell of a sentence. What is a good example of that? Oh, I don't know. Maybe like a bunch of white people getting together and saying, we're going to have an all-white community. That's kind of what he's getting at. So what is he calling that? He's calling it a maladaptive response, right? It's a way of them saying, all right, I'm enough of all this shit. I want to be away from all this. Get away from me. Okay, that's a maladaptive response. The proper response would be to organize and have missions to accomplish, to stop the enemy. That's a proper response. Okay, just saying. And no offense to people that want to go and have their own groups, set up their own communities. I'm totally for that. Not saying I'm against that. I'm just saying they already know that that's what the response is going to be. So just be aware of that, right? Organize hangings in public square. Yes, exactly, Janice. That's exactly what we need to get back to. To continue. All right. So who can deny that with the huge increase in drug usage, crack, now fentanyl, making thousands of instant new addicts each day, the shocking rise in the murder of infants each day, aborticide, which by now far exceeds casualties suffered by our armed forces in both world wars, Korea and Vietnam, the open acceptance of homosexuality and lesbianism, now literally transgenderism, whose quote-unquote rights are protected by more and more laws each year, attorney work product doctrine, the terrible, because they're just, okay, attorney work product doctrine is about the attorney controlling isms, all right? So they use isms to control market conditions so that they can continue to make their 33 1/3% out of everybody else's ass. Okay, that's the attorney for you. All right, to continue. All right, the terrible plague of AIDS, that was kind of a come and gone thing, washing over our towns and cities, total failure of our education system, the stunning increase in the divorce rate, a murder rate which shocks the rest of the world into disbelief, well, only in shithole cities where gun control is at its highest. Doesn't happen in white rural populations where everybody is armed. Just saying. Because people tend to be civil then. Satanic serial killings, the disappearance of, and I added the hundreds of thousands, because it literally only said thousands of young children, snatched off the street by perverts, a virtual tidal wave of pornography accompanied by permissiveness. This is all about the human trafficking aspect. And now, of course, we have things like, like OnlyFans is just a thing that everybody just takes for granted, right? Shit like that. Okay, on our television screens, well, now on your phone screens, who can deny that this nation is in crisis, which we are not addressing and from which we are turning away? Well-meaning people who specialize in these things blame a lot of the problem on education, or what passes for it in the United States. Criminals now abound in the age groups of 9 to 15. Rapists are quite commonly as young as 10. Our social specialists, our teachers' unions, our churches say it's all due to faulty education system. No. It's due to the destruction of the family. It's due to the destruction of morals. It's due to allowing biological psychopaths to fucking run your life. That's what it's due to. All right? So stop creating scapegoats and stop swinging chickens over your fucking head. All right? The problem lies with you. You are not doing what you're supposed to be doing to end these people's control over you. And yes, it is your fault. So maybe it's about time you make a plan to stop it. Right? I Am Grateful said, I recently read about the Royal Order of the Jesters. Yeah, talk about a filth. Yeah. Ugh. I could get into the Jesters. I won't. But basically, they're the ones that are a secret society of a bunch of party freaks. And they're the ones that go around to the other secret societies and basically provide prostitutes for them. All right? That's the Jesters for you. And as I recall, I literally have the paperwork of, I think more than one president actually, that said that they were actually members of the Jester and has their signature on it. So anyway, yeah, connected with the Shriners, right? Pretty insidious, yes. Sheriff presented badge to Grand Mason. Salutes even cover their exemptions. Yeah, you get the point. Yep, I do. Yep, that's all about all the rest of the other secret societies and fuckery that goes on. So anyway, to continue, witness how test scores keep dropping. The specialists bewail that the fact that the United States now ranks 39th, and I'm sure it's lower than that now, in level of education in the world. Why do we bemoan what is so obvious? Our education system was programmed to self-destruct. That was what Dr. Alexander King was sent here by NATO to arrange. That is what Justice Hugo Black was ordered to arrange. The fact is, the Committee of 300, with the approval of our government, does not want our youth to be properly educated. Exactly. There's a huge difference between education. Education, the root word of education in Greek is eduke. It means to draw out or to bring out. And hopefully you're drawing out or bringing out the best in whoever it is you're educating. That's the root of that word. Schooling, on the other hand, is putting you like in a school of fish. And so that when one fin turns, all the fins turn, and you can just push the school of fish wherever you want them to go. Oh no, there's a shark over there. Oh, we got to go this way. Right? And they all just turn and go like a bunch of retarded lemmings right off the cliff to their own destruction. This, what he's talking about, the education system, is called the Prussian education system. It started in Prussia after they had a good education system in Prussia. And of course, Prussia was very well renowned for hiring out their soldiers. They made an awful lot of money by literally having Prussian mercenaries. In the Revolutionary War, they were called the Hessians. Same idea, same thing. And what they found was that if they educated their people too much, when they went out to go do mercenary work, the men who were supposed to fight said, I don't want to do this. I don't want to die. And we just, tend to turn around and, not fight. So the Prussian education system, which is what we have here, was created by Prussia to brainwash their men into not questioning the authority of government. That's where it came from. And that's what we're dealing with. That's what we have here. The idea of rote memorization, the idea of taking tests all the time, the idea of having a goddamn Pavlovian bell rang every hour and you salivate and stupid get up and go change and get your books and go to your locker and right. It's all programming. All of it. All 10,000 hours of it. It's all programming. And none of it's good for you. That's why everybody should homeschool their children in whatever you want to educate them in. I don't care. Anything would be better than what they're facing now, especially after, transvestite fucking story time. But anyway, I digress. All right, to continue. The education that Freemason Justice Hugo Black, Alexander King, Gunneral Bidrell, and his wife came to give the children of the United States is that crime pays, expediency is what counts. They taught our children that the United States law is unequally applied, and that is perfectly in order. Our children were properly educated by a decade of corrupt examples. Ronald Reagan and George Bush were ruled by greed and became totally corrupted by it. Our education system hasn't failed. Under the guidance of King, Black, and others, it is actually a great success. But it all depends from whose point of view we look at. The Committee of 300 is delighted with their education system and will not allow one comma of it to be changed. Exactly. Ever question why? I don't know. What's the name of that? I suspect it was on. He'd probably remember. There's a name of a book company, meaning the educational books of American school children. It's run by an Israeli firm. Like, that's not a problem, right? McGraw-Hill, thank you. Okay, yeah, Janice, that's it. So yeah, they run our educational system by printing the very books and brainwashing the children into what they should think, right? So yeah, just a thought about that. We homeschool our kids just like us instead of the system. Yeah, that's a good idea. And I've known a lot of people that were homeschooled, and they are so different. Like, they are just totally different kinds of people. Like, they're open thinkers. They have curiosity. It hasn't been beaten out of them. They question things logically. And It's good. And you only get that from children being homeschooled. So, yes, congratulations on accomplishing that. You have actually created the next generation of sovereign Americans. Because without that, we're not going to have any. Right? All right. So to continue. According to Stanford and Willis Harman, the induced trauma of long-range penetration, of which our education is a part, has been going on for 45 years. Yet how many are aware of the insidious pressures being applied to our society and the constant exposure to brainwashing that goes on every day? The mysterious gang wars that broke out in New York in the 1950s is an example of how the conspirators can create a stage, manage, and any type of disruptive elements they like. Where those gang wars came from, nobody knew until the 1980s, when researchers uncovered the hidden controllers who directed the so-called social phenomenon. Gang wars were carefully planned at Stanford, deliberately designed to shock society and cause ripples of disturbances. By 1958, there were in excess of 200 of these gangs. They were made popular by a musical in a Hollywood movie, West Side Story. After making the news for a decade, suddenly, in 1966, they disappeared off the streets of New York, Los Angeles, New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia, and Chicago. Throughout the near decade of gang violence, the public reacted accordingly to the profiled response Stanford expected. Society as a whole could not comprehend gang warfare, and the public responded in a maladaptive manner. Had there been those wise enough to recognize in gang wars a Stanford experiment in social engineering and brainwashing, the conspirators' plot would have been exposed. Either we did not have trained specialists who could see what was going on, which is highly unlikely, or else they were threatened and remained silent. Right. Very much how all holistic healers were threatened to remain silent or literally got whacked during the last poisoning episode of the entire world. The cooperation with Stanford by the news media brought to light a new age attack on our environment, just as predicted by the social engineers and new science scientists at Tavistock. All right, and he's going to continue to talk about this gang warfare. I'm just going to skip this part because it is interesting, but it's not all that important, and we already know what they're doing. So what he's kind of saying is just he's repeating more of their modus operandi, right? So I'm going to skip past the gang stuff, and I'm going to come down here to a little bit and talk about the advent of the Beatles thing. So an outstanding example of social conditioning to accept change, even when it is recognized as unwelcome change by the large population group in the sites of Stanford Research Institute, was the quote-unquote advent of the Beatles. The Beatles were brought to the United States as part of a social experiment, which would subject large population groups to brainwashing, of which they were not even aware. When Tavistock brought the Beatles to the United States, nobody could have imagined the cultural disaster that was to follow in their wake. The Beatles were an integral part of, quote-unquote, the Aquarian conspiracy, a living organism which sprang from the changing images of man, that particular research report, which I won't restate. Policy report prepared by SRI Center for Study of Social Policy Director, Professor Willis Harman. The phenomenon of the Beatles was not a spontaneous rebellion by youth against the old social system. Instead, it was a carefully crafted plot to introduce by a conspiratorial body, which would not be identified, a highly destructive and divisive element into a large population group targeted for change against its will. And pause and make a point here. Against its will. I have made a lot of points over the years of teaching at the VSOF that all of this is about the control of your will. Okay? What do? They steal your will. What do they do after your parents unknowingly register you at the Foundling Hospital? They probate your will. What do they do when they slide across a contract, which they say is a license that you have to get because of some law? They're taking your will. You don't have to sign that contract. And as it is stated in many different court cases, but specifically one. If the state turns a right into a privilege and issues a license for it, the citizen may exercise that right of his own volition. Okay? You don't have to continue to act like infants. You say, well, then the cops will give me a ticket or they'll do this or they'll pull me over or whatever. Fine. Then stop being an infant and know how to sue them in court. It's not goddamn rocket science. All right? But what it is it takes will. And that's what everything's been washed away from. Your will has been diluted, destroyed, and scattered to the wind. And specifically when it comes to law, how they've destroyed and taken your will. You ever go back and think about all of the TV shows, when there was still TV, almost every bloody TV show was all something about cops or something about attorneys, right? Law and order, cops, right? What are they doing with all that? They're programming your brain to say, you're too stupid to understand the law. You have to give it to what's called an expert, called an attorney. And the cops will go around and actually help people. No, not at all. All police forces are literally the standing armies that the founding fathers warned us about. That's what they are. They all have their own Dun and Bradstreet numbers. They all have their own private corporations, as do the courts. Okay? And all of it is to take away your will. All right? So, will cannot be understated. That's exactly the problem. Them taken away from you. So just know that. Pay attention to it at every different turn. So to continue, new words and new phrases prepared by Tavistock were introduced to America along with the Beatles. Such words as rock, in relation to music sounds, teenager, which I didn't know until I read this, cool, discovered, and pop music were a lexicon of disguised code words signifying the acceptance of drugs and arrived with and accompanied the Beatles wherever they went to be, quote unquote, discovered by, quote unquote, teenagers. Incidentally, the word teenagers was never used until just before the Beatles arrived on the scene, courtesy of the Tavistock Institute for Human Relations. Fascinating, right? They can create a word like that just out of nowhere. As in the case of gang wars, nothing would or have been accomplished without the cooperation of the media, especially the electronic media, and, in particular, the scurrilous Ed Sullivan, who had been coached by the conspirators as to the role he was to play. Nobody would have paid much attention to the motley crew from Liverpool, 12-atonal system of quote-unquote music that was to follow, had it not been for the overabundance of press exposure. The 12-atonal system consisted of heavy, repetitive sounds taken from the music of, get this, taken from the music of the Cult of Dionysus and the Baal priesthood by Adoron and given a quote-unquote modern flavor by this special friend of the Queen of England and hence the Committee of 300. Fascinating. And Janice said, McGraw had ties to Epstein. Yeah, exactly. Yep, I knew that. That's, if you really want to know why the rest of the, whatever, the dingbats that think they're actually running government don't want to touch Epstein or anything about it with a 10-foot cattle prod, I think it's because it goes back and connects to that point about who's actually running the school system, who's actually printing the books, and Ghislaine Maxwell and what her dad was all about. So, but anyway, to continue. So Tavistock and his Stanford Research Center created trigger words. Okay. All trigger words devised in the context of rock music were designed for mass control of the few targeted group, the youth of America. The Beatles did a perfect job, or perhaps it would be more correct to say that Tavistock and Stanford did a perfect job. The Beatles merely reacting like trained robots, with a little help from their friends. Code words for using drugs and making it cool. The Beatles became a highly visible, quote-unquote, new type, more Tavistock jargon, and, as such, it was not long before the group made new styles, fads in clothing, hairstyles, and language usage, which upset the older generation, as was intended. This was part of the fragmentation, maladaptation, process worked out by Willis Harman and his team of social scientists and genetic engineering tinkerers and put into action. The role of the print and electronic media in our society is crucial to the success of brainwashing large population groups. Gang wars ended in Los Angeles in 1966 as the media withdrew its coverage. The same thing will happen with the current wave of gang wars in Los Angeles. Street gangs will wither on the vine once media saturation coverage is toned down and then completely withdrawn. As in 1966, the issue would become burned out. Street gangs will have served their purpose of creating turbulence and insecurity. Exactly the same pattern will be followed in the case of rock music. Deprived of media attention, it will eventually take its place in history. Following the Beatles, who incidentally were put together by the Tavistock Institute, came another made in England rock group who, like the Beatles, had Theo Adoro write their cult lyrics and compose all of their music. I hate to use these beautiful words in the context of Beatlemania. It reminds me of how wrongly the word lover is used when referring to the filthy interaction between two homosexuals withering in pig swill. To call rock, quote unquote rock, music is an insult. Likewise, the language used in rock lyrics. Tavistock and Stanford research then embarked on the second phase of the work commissioned by the Committee of 300. What about death metal? I love it so much. Well, since we all rock out with good old Flood on the Doom Depot from time to time. Yes, but of course that is very much what they're talking about. There might be a reason why you love it so much, because it deals with dark occult aspects of, as he said, and he kind of glossed over this, but it's extremely important, the Dionysian aspect of it. Anyway, he set it up there somewhere. So how the cult of Dionysus is Hollywood, okay? The cult of Dionysus is literally, when you go back that far, aspects of what Plato was kind of trying to refer to when he was talking about the shadows on the cave. He was, in a sense, kind of making fun over poking at the cult of Dionysus and being like, maybe you shouldn't take that as reality. Like, maybe you should get up, turn around, and realize that there's light outside the cave and leave the cave, right? That's referred to as Plato's allegory of the cave. But anyway, so yeah, they were doing it back then, and shit hasn't changed, okay? Because the human mind is still susceptible to the same programming than it was back then, is kind of what I'm getting at. So anyway, to continue. Tavistock and Stanford research then embarked on a second phase of the work commissioned by the Committee of 300. This new phase turned up the heat for social change in America. As quickly as the Beatles had appeared on the American scene, so did too the Beat Generation, trigger words designed to separate and fragment society. The media now focused on its attention on the Beat Generation. Other Tavistock coined words came seemingly out of nowhere. Beatniks, hippies, flower children became part of the vocabulary of America. It became popular to drop out and wear dirty jeans, go about with long, unwashed hair. The Beat Generation cut itself off from mainstream America. They became just as infamous as their cleaner Beatles before them. The newly created group and its quote-unquote lifestyle swept millions of young Americans into the cult, which was just an explosion of the cult of Dionysus. A very programmed one, but that's what it was. So anyway, American youth underwent a radical revolution without ever being aware of it, while the older generation stood by helplessly, unable to identify the source of the crises, and thus reacting in a maladaptive manner against its manifestation, which were drugs of all types, marijuana, and later LSD, so conveniently provided for them by the Swiss pharmaceutical company Sandoz. Following the discovery by one of its chemists, Albert Hofmann, how to make synthetic ergotamine, probably not pronouncing it correct, a powerful mind-altering drug. The Committee of 300 financed the project through one of their banks, S.C. Warburg, and the drug was carried to America by the philosopher Aldous Huxley. Now, that it be any surprise to anyone that all of the banks are in the business of laundering drug money should be pretty much common knowledge by now. But anyway, just to make a connection to that, when you want to talk about one of the largest drug operations in all of mankind's history, that was referred to as the Opium Wars. And that's where Sassoon family and cohorts and sons of bitches made their great wealth, was by addicting China to opium, because the Chinese didn't care much for anything that the Europeans had to trade for their tea. And since, I don't know, the English decided to get addicted to tea from some strange idea, that's what happened. Sassoon was like, oh, you don't want us to give us tea? All right, well, literally have your entire population become addicted to opium. And then eventually the Chinese cracked and said, okay, fine, we'll just sell you the fucking tea. Right. But not before Sassoon got rich. And a lot of that infrastructure, that money, that way of doing things basically never changed. It's the same stupid reason right now the CIA is referred to as Dope Incorporated. Okay, that is their fucking nickname. For good reason, because they come from a line of those people going all the way back. Right? But anyway, I digress. All right, the new wonder drug was promptly distributed in sample size packages, handed out free of charge on college campuses across the United States and at quote-unquote rock concerts, which became the leading vehicle for proliferating the use of drugs. The question that cries out for an answer is, what was the Drug Enforcement Agency, DEA, doing at the time? Well, of course, the answer is fuck all. They were part of it. There's compelling circumstantial evidence that would appear to indicate that the DEA knew what was going on, but was ordered not to take any action. They were probably ordered to distribute it, but whatever. With very substantial numbers of the new British rock bands arriving in the U.S., rock concerts began to become a fixture on the social calendar of American youth. In tandem with these concerts, the use of drugs among the youth rose in proportion. The devilish bedlam of discordant, heavy beat sounds numbed the minds of listeners so that they were easily persuaded to try the new drug on the basis that everybody is doing it. Okay. Again, to get back to these people profaning everything, right? And corrupting everything. Okay. The cult of Dionysus and what they're talking about, this particular type of rock music, whatever, they get this from the ancient knowledge of shamanistic cultures and the way that the shamans use rhythm as a good thing to help empower you, wake you up, heal you spiritually. So what they did is they took it and they profaned it, right? So you have the good side of the shamanistic cult. That's why one of the major things of this Committee of 300 and, well, the Luciferians fucks for thousands of years has been to absolutely unequivocally destroy and kill off shamanistic cultures. Wherever you find them, wipe them out. Just obliterate them. Absolute genocide, right? Because they do not want anyone actually teaching the positive side of vibration and energy, which, if anybody who's half learned out there is well aware of, that the Egyptians knew, because the only way they were going to build the things that they built was by knowing that on a very high level. Okay, so what have these people done? They've corrupted it, they've stolen it, they've occulted it, and they've turned around and they've used it as a weapon against you. So realize that, okay, as to what they're doing. All right, to continue. Peer pressure is a very strong weapon. The quote-unquote new culture received maximum coverage from the jackal media, which cost the conspirators not one thin dime. Great anger was felt by a number of civic leaders and churchmen over the new cult, but their energies were misdirected against the result of what was going on and not against the cause. Again, know who the real enemy is. Critics of rock cult made the same mistakes that had been made in the Prohibition era. They criticized law enforcement agencies, teachers, parents, anybody but the actual conspirators, the Luciferian filth. Because of the anger and resentment I feel toward the great drug plague, I make no apology for using language which is not customary for me to use. One of the worst drug slobs ever to walk the streets of America was Allen Ginsberg. Ginsberg pushed the use of LSD through advertising, which cost him nothing. Although, under normal circumstances, it would have cost millions of dollars in TV advertising revenues. This free advertising for drugs and LSD in particular reached a new high in the late 1960s, thanks to the ever-willing cooperation of the media. The effect of Ginsberg's mass advertising campaign was devastating. The American public was subjected to one culture future shock after another in rapid succession. Right, just like how the drums go in rapid succession, that's future culture shocks in rapid succession. Bam, 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 bam. Makes you fucking numb as to what's going on, right? So just remember that. Janice said, good vibrations are literally the key to so much. They unlock better moods, mental stability, faster healing, and frankly, just an overall better life. I completely agree with you, which is why brilliant, wonderful, highly intelligent Western cultures created things like classical music. Okay. And why we tune things to a certain harmonic and do not tune them to the harmonic which the evil ones have now decided that everything should be tuned to. And of course, Janice knows more about tuning and harmonics than anybody else that I've ever known in my entire life and probably ever will know on the planet. All right, to continue. We became overexposed and overstimulated. And again, may I remind you that this is Tavistock jargon, lifted from the Tavistock training manual, overwhelmed by its new development. And when we reached that point, our minds began to lapse into apathy. It was just too much to cope with. That is to say, long-range penetration had taken hold of us. Ginsberg claimed to be a poet, but no greater gibberish was ever written by anyone who ever aspired to becoming a poet. Ginsberg's designated task had little to do with poetry. His main function was to push the new subculture and force acceptance of it upon the large targeted population group. To assist him in this task, Ginsberg co-opted the services of Norman Mailer, a writer of sorts who had spent some time in a mental institution. Yeah, that wasn't lost on me. Mailer was a favorite of the left-wing Hollywood crowd, again, the cult of Dionysus, and so had no problem with getting maximum television time for Ginsberg. Naturally, Mailer had to have a pretext. Not even he could blatantly come out with the true nature of Ginsberg's television appearances. So a charade was adopted. Mailer would talk seriously on camera with Ginsberg about poetry and literature. This method of getting wide television coverage at no cost to themselves was followed by every rock group and concert promoter who followed the example set by Ginsberg. The electronic media moguls had big hearts when it came to giving free time to these dirty, verminous creatures and their even dirtier products and filthy ideas. Right. Who controls the media? Exactly. That's what they're talking about. And yes, Uncle Steve-o, yeah, the 432 hertz. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and if you don't know what that is, what Janice is talking about and what Uncle Steve-o's talking about, that you should not tune it to 440, which is what the evil ones use. That's the whole point. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to use vibration to break you down, to destroy you, to alter your consciousness. Because ultimately, if you guys want a short quantum physics lesson, ultimately everything in the universe is nothing but vibration. When you get down to the very, 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 very bottom of everything, which is what the Big Hadron Collider is all about, is to find all those funny little, interesting little particles. And what is their vibration? And what do they do, right? As to have some sense of what's going on. Because we, as people, humans, we've learned a lot about the universe, but unfortunately, there's this thing called, or what they're labeling as a placeholder for it, because they don't know what it is, called dark energy, which is basically like 80 to 85% of the totality of the universe, but yet nobody knows what it is, right? So anyway, I'm kind of digressing there a little bit, but the point is about vibration is that the understanding that when I shake your hand, the only reason my hand does not go through yours is because of vibration, okay? Because things are vibrating so fast that it literally won't allow it to go through. It'd be like slamming your head against a prop of a turboplane, right? You can't push yourself through it because the vibration and the speed of which it's going past won't allow that, right? Okay. So since everything is an aspect of vibration, they're going to always use vibration to profane, again, what they're doing. And in the case of the programming and the tuning, you always tune to 432, never to 440, okay? For these reasons. And it was only, I don't know how many years ago, Uncle Steve, maybe you could tell me when they came out with this fuckery. But I think it was maybe 10 years ago, maybe more than 10 years, maybe 20. I don't know. You'd probably know better than I do. That they did it for a reason. They were like, hey, there's a lot of people that just, I don't know, are just picking up instruments and starting to just do their own thing. I know. Let's have them tune all their instruments to the wrong vibration. Yeah, that's healthy. Right? So anyway, I think I'll pause here. We're at 2 hours, so I will make a red note here, and we can come back to this understanding of what Ginsberg was doing with LSD, and maybe we can talk a little bit more about vibration as well. So, all right. So with that, I don't think anybody had any questions per se. I'll just flip through chat real quick, see if anybody had anything on FTJ. Nope, looks like we're good. So, but a lot of good comments though. And thank you everybody for hanging out. I'm glad to be streaming on FTJ. I like the chat a lot better, even though the rest of you guys can't see it. Technically, you can do fun things with FTJ chat. Like you can throw in memes, you can throw in links, which we can in our VSOF chat on Mega, obviously. But I think there's some restrictions depending on Rumble possibly, and also possibly on Odyssey as well. But it's nice to be on FTJ. I'm glad to be streaming there. I like the platform. It's good. Got a lot of good people on it as well. And it's got great community. So, as does Rumble. Love you guys too. So, all right. So with that, I will call it. And as a public service announcement, if any of you would like to join the VSOF, you can simply go to vocationalscienceofreedom.org and then go to the Welcome Package, click on it, download the Welcome Package here, and then fill it out, and then send it back to me at vsof@protonmail.com. And then you set up your communications, and you guys are welcome to join us on Mega. You're welcome to share information and join in on the Wednesday night roundtables, which we will have this Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and they run till we're done. There's no time limit, and there are no real rules, particularly on Wednesday night. Talk about whatever you want, bring up whatever you want, yell at whoever you want, vent as much as you want. It's all welcome. So until that time, all of you have a wonderful rest of your weekend, hopefully. And as always, stay safe and stay sovereign.